This is the BBC.
Hello and welcome. This is another Confessions podcast from your good friends at Radio 2. BBC Radio 2. And there's the jingle to prove it. So we have another concise collection for you, all the confessions in one neat package. This week we feature Too Much Monkey Business. That's the one with the singing toy. Oh, you want to hear the singing toy again?
I love my boots and me. They help me swing from tree to tree.
From Dora the Explorer.
I feel so happy with them on my feet. We're best friends, yeah, my boots and me.
So that was the first one. Size of a Cow was the second one. Trouble Dutch and Take Me I'm Yours. They were the confessions. Here's the detail. Dear Father Simon and the Apostolic Assembly, this event, which I relay with resounding regret, took place some 13 years ago when my wife, myself and our then 3-year-old son were holidaying in the United States of America. My son was a fervent fan of the then current children's programme Dora the Explorer, which I remember very well, highly enjoyable. And in particular, one of the main characters, a singing, dancing monkey called Boots. Anyone remember Dora the Explorer?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Every time Boots appeared on the screen, singing and dancing in his catchy 4-line ditty, my son's little face would light up and he would clap his tiny hands with joy. Watching this innocent enjoyment brought a goofy grin to my still fairly newly minted father's face. It was the height of summer and very hot and humid, so we decided to undertake a planned day's shopping, visiting the cool oases of one air-conditioned shop after another. My wife was salivating at the thought of the myriad marketing delights in store for her and had a lengthy list of proposed purchases. Our day started with a visit to the mall, and we decided to separate so best to utilise the time. My wife went off with a determined gleam in her eye, heading to a large department store, whilst my son and I entered the portals of a well-known American toy shop. To my son's immediate delight, his eyes were drawn to a display of Dora the Explorer toys, and in particular to an animated Boots, who was singing and dancing along to his song, just like on the TV, which, if you need a refreshment...
I love my boots and me. They help me swing from tree to tree. I feel so happy with them on my feet. We're best friends, yeah, my boots and me.
That's what it did. It was instant love, Father Simon, and he toddled over as fast as his little legs would carry him and clasped the animatronic Boots to his heart. How could I resist such a display of devotion? My son's pleading eyes looked up at me, and with abject longing I picked up a boxed Boots off the shelf and, gulping somewhat at the cost, made our way to the tills and paid. My son was desperate to show Mum his new treasure, so Boots was duly unboxed, a button was pressed, and he started to sing and dance.
I love my boots and me.
But horrors, something was wrong. Boots' song was normally 4 stanzas long. However, this monkey stopped after the first line and could not be persuaded to sing any more. He was obviously faulty. The one on display in the shop had sung the whole song. So, muttering under my breath, I returned to the store to exchange the toy. Much to my dismay, when I tried other Bootses on the shelves, they all did exactly the same thing. They stopped after the first line and resumed a frozen state. Must be a faulty batch, I thought. Prizing the toy from my anguished son's grip, went to get my money back, determined that I would find a working Boots at another store. Now, Father Simon, this is where the full horror of my tale really begins to unfold, as it's become known in our household as the Great Boots Hunt. Leaving that particular mall, we then began a journey of epic proportions, crisscrossing the vastness of the city's greater metropolitan area, visiting store after store, toy shop after toy shop, department stores, drugstores. None was left unvisited. Each time I left my increasingly incredulous wife and my now distraught child in the baking heat of many asphalted car parks, whilst I ran in search of a working Boots, a Boots that could maybe go...
Love my boots and me.
But all the way through to the end, not just the first line. Anyway, in each, I came across the same problem. Boots just sang one line of his increasingly annoying song and then stopped. My wife grew progressively grumpier as one day of her precious holiday was spent stuck in an overheated car with a fractious toddler. But I ignored her pleas to forget the whole thing. My son wanted a fully functioning Boots, and I, as his father, was going to get one for him. Some 5 hours later, tempers frayed beyond breaking point, I stumbled into another branch of the toy store. There on the shelf, 5 boxed Boots, With rising desperation, I pressed all their buttons and discordant tunes played out of sync. But even through this cacophony, I could tell that all 5 only sang one line. That was it. And I had had enough. I snapped. Seizing a boots, I advanced on a very young assistant and let go with a tirade which echoed through the whole store. It was a Churchillian British tirade. I heaped contempt on the makers of the TV programme who had developed such a loathsome toy. I decried a particular Far East nation for their manufacturing techniques which produced such shoddy rubbish. I was scathing about this toy store for selling such obviously faulty goods without adequately checking the quality. My anger, Simon, was righteous. I had right on my side, and by heavens, I would have justice.
Okay.
In my defence, I was still relatively new to this fatherhood business and not well acquainted with new technology built into modern-day toys. So it was a complete revelation to me when the young shop assistant reached over, took the boots from my whitened knuckles, pulled a small tab of plastic out from around the batteries, and lo and behold...
I love my boots and me. They help me swing from tree to tree. I feel so happy with them on my feet. We're best friends, yeah, my boots and me.
The much maligned monkey gave forth his whole 4-line song in clear tones with accompanying hip-swaying movements. In my innocence, I had failed to notice this now common practice, which ensures that the batteries do not discharge whilst the toy is displayed in a store. The passing of a decade has still not dimmed the shame and embarrassment I experienced on that day, and my wife still ironically hums one line only of the Boots song whenever we pass that well-known store. Even worse, although long ago relegated to the attic, I came across Boots just the other day, and with what I perceived as an evil glint in his eye, he still sang all 4 lines of his song whilst contemptuously swaying his hips. Try that when you get home.
Contemptuously
sway your
my
hips with contempt. Father Simon, I seek forgiveness not from my son who's too young to recall the trauma of having his much longed for boots torn from his grasp and not returned until many hours later. Now I plead for the understanding of the good people of one particular Far Eastern nation over whom I cast aspersions on the quality of their manufacturing and technological capabilities. More particularly, I seek it from the young salesman at the American toy store who probably still labours under the impression that all Brits are wild-eyed fools with limited understanding of the most basic electrical circuitry. You may well be right, Gareth, actually. You may well be right about that. Let's just see what the team make of all this. And Gareth needs your forgiveness, Sister Bobby, but what are you going to say?
Well, Gareth, I applaud you in your quest to find your son the toy that he wanted, with the song that he wanted, with his little kind of guy, his little friend. I think that's admirable. In the heat, you could have just given up and said, we'll find you another one. However, this is why I can't forgive you, because it comes down to the basic thing. When you don't know something, ask. And I think you were just too afraid to ask someone in the first shop.
Yeah.
If you were okay to ask in the last shop, why weren't you asking in the first shop? It seems to me common sense to go, are these broken or is it me? Or my expectations wrong? So, Gareth, you are unforgiven.
How small
Not
did he
forgiven.
feel once that shop assistant went, no, you just pull out this little piece of plastic, all is fine, Brother Matthew?
Well, this is certainly one of those stories where you could tell where it was going, but is still all the funnier even so. And I mean, when he gave the first one back, he must have said, "This, I want my money back." Because this one's only singing the first verse. And at that point, surely the person in the first store should have said, no, you take your plastic
So it's
thing
their
out.
fault?
So actually, yes. It wasn't going to be every single Boots around this nation was going to be was faulty. It had to be, something was going on with the plastic. So it's down to the shop assistant in the first shop. So it's a big conspiracy, including Boots, against Gareth. So for that reason, I am going to forgive.
Simon and assorted Radio 2 employees.
It tends to be just us.
There's been something I've been feeling bad about for some time now, and I guess now is a good time to throw myself on your and the nation's mercy. I moved to California in 1999 and spent 13 very enjoyable years there, seeing the sights, dazzling folks with my adorable accent, and writing about baseball. I met and started a relationship with someone from Fresno, a city in California's Central Valley and a prime site for a nuclear weapons testing ground. It is a hideous place. As things progressed, I got more integrated into this girl's family, but to say I didn't get on with her mother is a grotesque understatement, as indeed was she. Her name was Darlene. And she was basically useless. Not only useless, Father Simon, but sponging, rude, no manners, intolerant, judgmental, and generally horrible.
Okay.
Okay?
That's a lot of things.
That's an awful lot of things for Darlene to hold all in one place. Oh, yes, and the incessant, inane questions about Britain. What do we do for Thanksgiving? Nothing. How did we handle American Indian reservations down in England? Right. Do we celebrate Christmas? Do we celebrate Easter? Do we celebrate Halloween? What are these funny French fries you're serving me? They were parsnips. It happened every holiday meal. Have I met the Queen? Do you have the internet in England? I could go on for hours. And while I was always the epitome of British politeness at all times, says Andy, I couldn't stand her. So one day, Uncle Frank shuffled off this mortal coil. So off my partner and I went to Fresno for the funeral. She was late. Her mother was late. Uncle Frank was late, but he had an excuse. By the time we got to the church, the only seats left were at the back, next to the aisle. There must have been about 300 people there. It turned out that Uncle Frank had been a rodeo champion and a hugely successful cattle farmer. So the church was packed with massive, highly tanned, Stetson-wearing cowboy types, there to pay their respects to the great man. We did have a few minutes before the service started, though, which my partner spent pointing out who in the family was who. That's Uncle Bob. That's Uncle Billy.
Obviously.
That's Cousin Chuck.
Okay.
That's Uncle Randy. Anyway, at this point, Darlene, who had applied so much cheap Walmart perfume that people had started moving their chairs away, chimed in. I've never liked him since he made that cow poo on me. There was a moment's silence. Sorry, what was that, Darlene? I replied. He made a cow poo on my face. A smile crept across my face as I pressed for more details. My partner explained that Darlene, I know I'm using the same voices voice for both characters, but hey. My partner exclaimed that Darlene used to go and play on Cousin Chuck's cattle ranch when she was a child, and he was always playing pranks on her. I could sympathise with that. Now, on this occasion, Chuck, who living on a ranch was very familiar with the workings of a cow, suggested Darlene go and stand under a cow so its twitching tail would act like a fan. Darlene complied, and, well, you already know the rest. The thought of this woman who'd been making my life such a misery, getting on the wrong end of a cow, was too much, and so I started that giggling, stifled laugh thing you do when you shouldn't really be laughing at all. The coup de grace to my composure came when, straight-faced, she added, and it just kept on coming and coming. It was so heavy. She hadn't even jumped out of the way when the cow started doing its thing. It was all too much. The image was just too much, and I exploded into laughter. Tears rolling down my face, shoulders pumping, ribs aching. The more I tried to stop, the worse it got. I managed to stop for a few seconds, but the laughter burst out again and again, tears rolling down my face. It was at this point, of course, that the organ started, the back doors swung open, and Uncle Frank was wheeled in. Open coffin, 10-gallon hat on his chest, the works. The whole cowboy congregation turned towards the oncoming coffin to see yours truly laughing hysterically just as Uncle Frank was trundling past. If you've never had 300 cowboys stare at you in church whilst a dead man gets wheeled past, let me assure you, it's quite specific. Yeah. Let me assure you, it's a little unnerving. But you know what, Father Simon? I think I got away with it. At the reception, people kept coming up to me with free drinks, telling me how moved they were by my show of grief, because they thought that's what my tears were for Uncle Frank and how much they love you British folk. I drank for free for the whole day. I couldn't bring myself to tell them that actually I was laughing at Darlene's unfortunate meeting with a cow's backside. I met Cousin Chuck just to ask if it was true, and it turned out that it was. More laughing ensued. The relationship with my partner went rapidly downhill after that. But hey-ho, says Andy from Lichfield. So I asked forgiveness not for laughing at Darlene's incident, fully deserved, but from Uncle Frank, who I'd never met, but by all accounts was a good chap and very good at rodeo-type activities. I'm sorry, Uncle Frank, I wasn't laughing at you being dead, but at your obnoxious niece idiotically sitting underneath a cow's bottom, and it's a thought I cherish to this very day. I never met you, but I'd bet good money that you're up there in that big ranch in the sky, laughing at Darlene too. Andy from Lichfield, who does not escape from Fresno without a scar, I feel. Anyway, so there's tonight's confession from Andy in Lichfield. It's a funeral, it's Uncle Frank, and a little bit of revenge. What do you think,
Okay.
Sister Bobby?
Before we do the funeral bit, because that's a separate bit, I'm having difficulty understanding why he disliked Darlene so much. I mean, she was asking lots of questions. You don't know, none of us know everything. We know what we know. And then we ask
Yes,
questions about the things we don't know. And even if they are, lots of conversations about what do you do for Thanksgiving. They're not
Do you
necessarily
have the
inane.
internet in England, for example? I would suggest might
yes,
be.
because many countries don't, and it was a long time ago, so maybe it hadn't reached. What I'm saying
Do you
is,
celebrate Christmas in England?
I
Do you
think
that
you
ma-
can be generous to people. Yeah, well, you know what I mean. Things are different. She didn't know, and she shouldn't be ridiculed for not knowing and asking questions. So what I'm saying is, Andy, you are really not forgiven for that because she just has a different upbringing or experience to you. So no, the laughing in the church over the story, absolutely. I've been to many funerals. They bring about many different experiences and emotions.
It's the fact that you're not supposed to laugh which makes you want to laugh.
I've seen many, well, yeah, and many people do show emotion. You're forgiven for that, but not for being not nice
so
about
half
Darlene.
and half and half.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd have lost my rag with Darlene well before then. I mean, who asks us? Who sits under a cow? Who sits under a cow's backside and doesn't expect something bad to happen?
It's a fan. It's operating like a fan.
Absolutely, yeah. Darlene, a bit thick. Bit thick, Darlene. Quit asking silly questions. Do we celebrate Christmas? Yes. Do we have the internet? We invented it, along with everything else. So I am going to say forgiven.
Father Simon and the Collective. 1993 is where we are. I'm working for a company that helped start up new restaurants. And given the rise of celebrity chefs and TV culinary shows, I was a busy man at this time, travelling around the country meeting with prospective restaurateurs all over the UK. My story starts catching a train to Manchester, where I'd set up 2 days of meetings. I found a spare double seat, sat down, and prepared to spend the next 3 hours hoping that my small suitcase that sat on the seat next to me was large enough to deter fellow passengers. This failed miserably, as a man soon asked to sit beside me. And this man was Dr. Hans Plicklow from the Biochemistry Research Institute in Eindhoven. I knew this because Dr. Hans thrust his yellow business card at me before he'd even properly sat down. Bang goes my quiet journey. With no book, work, or seemingly anything else to distract him, Dr. Hans spent the next 3 hours telling me all about his life as a biochemist and the conference he was to attend the next day, and the pride he had of speaking English without an accent, his love of train travel, and an even greater love of playing Dungeons and Dragons, which he told me about at great length.
Oh, good.
Let's not hear a bad word
No,
about Dungeons and
let's not.
Dragons.
Let's
very,
absolutely
very
not.
important work. We parted at Manchester Piccadilly, him thanking me for the great chat, of which I had contributed barely a handful of words. Getting back to the task in hand, however, I went to my first restaurant meeting and sat up at the bar waiting for the owner to be available. However, I soon was corralled into another conversation, this time with a man in a garish green suit who was eating on his own at a neighbouring table. Without any invitation, he had started telling me about the food he was eating and how he had flown in from Germany to attend a conference. I nodded politely but didn't comment too much for fear of encouraging him to talk more. Finally, the restaurant owner was ready for my meeting, and as I walked past the German man at his table, he thrust his business card in my direction, gesturing that I should reciprocate. Looking back, I still don't really know why I did what I did next. Maybe it was just the irritation at being spoken to by two men on the same day. Anyway, whatever the reason, I produced a yellow business card from my top suit pocket and gave it to him, nodding, and scuttled off without further conversation. This, of course, was the business card of Dr. Hans Plicklow from the Biochemistry Research Institute in Eindhoven. After more meetings, I arrived at my hotel early that evening. I approached the check-in desk and I was being asked my name by the receptionist, and I presented my driving license, and I was just about to say my name when a heavily accented voice behind me said, No, his name is Dr. Hans Plicklow. I turned, I know. It's a sort of standard European
we're in,
thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I turned, and to my horror, there was the man in the green suit from the restaurant, waving the yellow business card that I'd given him. He's a very, very important man, and you have him here as a guest, continued the man. He is our keynote speaker at the conference tomorrow. Germany, Czechoslovakia, Belgium.
Everyone's accounted for.
Everyone is in there. My world seemed to turn inside out, and conference, the receptionist. My world seemed to turn inside out, and any confidence that the receptionist had that I was an important man seemed to drain as fast as the colour in my face, especially when she looked at the name on my driving licence. Panicking, I snatched back the driving licence and mumbled, "I'll check in later." The receptionist was understandably now looking at me in a very strange manner. Slightly stunned by my predicament, though, I moved away from the check-in desk, thoughts racing through my head as to how to escape from the situation. So when my German acquaintance, there you are, suggested a drink at the hotel bar, crazy as it sounds, I thought it was the best option rather than embarrassing myself further at reception. We headed to the bar. I suggested that we didn't talk shop because I'll be doing all that at the conference the next day.
Obviously.
After a few drinks, my initial fear of being caught out began to recede. The alcohol helping me to remember parts of my conversation on the train with Dr. Plicklow. That's the Dutch Dr. Plicklow, let's not forget. I sounded credible to a point, and when any attempts to talk about biochemistry came up, I simply changed the subject. Well, one drink turned to 5, and my new German friend, plus some of his new colleagues, had joined us at the bar. Everyone who met me seemed a little in awe of me, I have to say, throughout the entire evening, which I was beginning to enjoy immensely. Drinks at the bar turned into dinner in the restaurant, followed by more drinks at the bar, all courtesy of my German friend. At last I bade them good night, as I, had my conference speech to finish for the following day. Father Simon, I'm relieved but equally ashamed to say that my deceit was never ever uncovered, at least not that I witnessed. The receptionist had ended her shift so I could check in without fear of reprisal or further embarrassment, and I ensured that I didn't leave my hotel room the next morning until I knew the conference had started. Over the years I've often wondered what my German friend and his colleagues must have thought as the real Dr. Plicklow stood up for his keynote speech. That's not him. Disbelief followed by anger, maybe? And then anger that in time might have turned to grudging respect. Who knows? So all these years later, I have to seek forgiveness, but not for obtaining free drinks and dinner from the intellectual groupies of a well-known biochemist, nor am I asking forgiveness from the hotel receptionist, who I assume is used to people checking into hotels under different aliases. But I do seek forgiveness on behalf of Dr. Hans Plicklow, whose identity I borrowed for a few drunken hours, but whose reputation I may have tarnished, albeit for a short time, by the ramblings of a drunken imposter. Well, who would have thought? Who would have thought? I mean, what a coincidence, given 2 business cards and then to hand one to the other guy, and then to have to pretend to be Dr. Hans Plicklow because the German guy has spotted who you are. All very confusing and very, very entertaining, and everyone seems, I think, to have had a good time, apart from Dr. Plicklow. What do we think, Sister Bobby?
Well, this is BI, isn't it? Before the internet, because anybody else, when you Google and check, or, another search engine,
Yes.
and your faces come up. So it would have been very easy it wouldn't be very easy to do that now, because of course you'd be able to be found out, because there'd be pictures of people, because that's what happens. So you're very lucky, Nick, that you got away with it, because I don't think you'd be able to do the same now.
No, that's
Should
true.
Dr. Piccolo forgive you? I don't know. I don't think you intended to do this in the first place. It was just a kind of, you weren't actually impersonating them. You were just
He
trying
did hand the
to...
business card. to
Yes,
the-
but he wasn't really trying to pretend to be somebody else. He was just trying to fend off the German. So I think in that case, I want to forgive. Because your intentions were
You
purely...
want to, but are you?
Yeah, I
Okay.
forgive.
Brother Matthew.
We've had a number of confessions, haven't we, where people sort of pretend to be rock stars. Or this has got to be the first one where we've had someone pretending to be a biochemist.
A leading biochemist from
I want
Eindhoven.
to be a biochemist. I think this is great because effectively this enlivened what could have been a very dull train journey. You get sat next to this doctor who tells you all about biochemistry and everything else, and then you get to use all of that knowledge to get yourself free drinks. I mean, what are the chances? I think it's superb. I will definitely forgive.
Dear Father Simon, my confession dates back over 20 years. When I was in my early 20s and I had purchased my first house. As I'd only moved a few miles away from my parents, I'd agreed to feed their lovely cat, Duchess, when they went off on a 2-week holiday to Italy. In actual fact, I had little choice to be obliging, as being a single new homeowner, they knew I had a very sad social life. Therefore, they knew my evenings were now spare to dedicate to grooming a cat and deadheading some of my dad's rhododendrons. I turned up on the first evening, exhausted after a long day at work, and duly fed Duchess her rather potent-smelling cat food, although I knew my parents would often give her a taste of whatever tasty treat my mum had prepared that evening. You see, my mum's cooking was legendary, and she would often spend her weekends cooking up large batches of stews and curries and then dispense them into numerous plastic containers for freezing. Anyway, with Duchess fed, I then set about watering and pruning the garden. Once I'd finished, I thought I'd have a quick rummage around my mum's big freezer in the garage to see if there were any culinary delights that she might have left in there. Well, to my sheer delight, I found container after container with various labels from chicken chasseur to beef casserole to lamb rogan josh. I perused for several minutes until I decided upon a large tub of chili con carne. I reheated the chili in the microwave, sat down to enjoy a large bowl of spicy goodness, helped down with a glass or two of Merlot, which I just happened to find in their rather vast wine cellar. So, Duchess looked on in hopefulness that I might share my meal with her, but a flying cushion directed at her head soon made her realise that this wasn't an option. I returned home nicely satisfied, if a little light-headed. I then returned the next evening to continue with my duties, and this time I decided I'd earned myself a chicken tikka masala and a glass of Pinot. This routine then continued for the 2 weeks, with me slowly working my way through the freezer contents and wine collection. I was actually quite sad when my last day arrived, and as I contemplated what my final meal would be, it dawned on me that I had actually eaten almost the entire contents of the freezer, not to mention the dwindling wine collection. Unlike my mother, I'm not known for my culinary skills, so my only option was to replace the meals with something of similar substance. But given my lack of funds, I had no choice but to pay a visit to a certain frozen supermarket, which I believe Peter Andre also frequents. I proceeded to then buy 14 new meals, each one as close to the meal I'd eaten as possible. Once back in my parents' house, I decanted the said meals into my mum's Tupperware containers, restuck some new labels, rearranged some wine bottles to cover up the 5 or so missing ones, and left feeling rather pleased with myself. The following week, what an act though, what a thing to do to you folks. Following week, my mum invited me round to view their holiday snaps, what with this being a long time ago. But when I arrived at the house, I heard an extremely unusual sound. My parents arguing. I stood in the hallway as my mum shouted something along the lines of, well, if it felt that way, then maybe you could get another wife to serve your meals. And frankly, she said, I've had enough of cooking your favourite dinners for the last 30 years. My dad made some protest sound along the lines of, well, you did ask. I just said it wasn't one of your best. I peered around the kitchen door, just in time to see a wooden spoon fly past my dad's head, just grazing the last remaining white hair on his head. My mum then stormed past me as I stood rooted to the spot and disappeared into the garage where a large black bin liner appeared. She then proceeded to empty the entire freezer contents into the bin liner and dump all of it into the wheelie bin, then taking herself off upstairs to run a bath, leaving my dad looking most confused by the events of the last 5 minutes. I casually then walked into the kitchen with a, oh, hi, Dad, how's it going? kind of look. My dad, still a bit shell-shocked from hearing my mum raise her voice and the near miss with the wooden spoon, then regaled me with the story of how my mum had asked what he would like to dinner. As he'd been eating pasta and fancy stews for the last few weeks in Italy, he said he was in the mood for a curry. My mum then dished him up one of her chicken kormas. He settled down to eat and she was having the obligatory post-holiday salad. After a while, my dad started to pick up the dinner and pick at it and make sniffing noises, and my mum says, "Is everything okay?" And he says, "It's not one of your best." "And have you tried a new recipe?" Well, he then added the final nail to his coffin by stating that the meat was a little bit chewy. Well, I deliberated for all of about 15 seconds and knew my only choice was to take my mum's side. I berated my dad for being so insensitive and reminded him of how lucky he was having someone to cook for him every night, while some of us have to make do with a pot noodle for dinner. I also said that I'd read somewhere that flying could affect your taste buds, and maybe this is what happened with him. Well, my dad, feeling very ashamed of his actions, then retrieved the containers from the bin and went and replaced them back into the freezer. Whilst my dad was down in the garage, I thought I'd try the chicken korma that was sat congealing on his dinner plate, and I had to agree it wasn't a patch on my mum's, but for £1 for a portion, I decided that maybe I'd stock up my freezer for future meal times. Anyway, after about 2 weeks, my dad had worked his way through every single container in the freezer and made the appropriate yummy noises. So my mum eventually forgave him, but she was never, ever any the wiser. She then went back to cooking up large batches of meals, much to my relief, and my dad never again questioned the fact that after 2 weeks, his dinners had started to taste better. He just seemed thankful that his taste buds had returned, and I'm glad to say they're still happily married today and still don't know.
They don't know?
They still don't know
Wow.
the reason for this strange one-off argument, and it was all because of Helen and the fact that she had replaced her mum's fabulous cooking with some cheap stuff, and it was that induced her dad to question the culinary skills he'd been living with. Now Bobby's looking slightly puzzled.
No, Helen. No, you can't be possibly forgiven. You created matrimonial discord.
She did.
And that is really not on. You could have just confessed to your mum and dad, look, I ate all your lovely cooking to feed the cat, so I owe you some dinners. And no doubt your mum would have said, that's all right, I'll cook you some as well. You basically put your mum in a really bad situation with your dad. You misrepresented your mum's cooking. You are not forgiven.
Okay, it's going to be hardline. Let's see what the novice makes of all that.
Helen, they're your parents. The idea you're doing them a favour. You've been feeding the Countess while they've been away. And, another member of the nobility. Duchess. Thank you, Bobby. And also, it didn't just sound that. She sounded like she was quaffing a bottle a night because she moved on from the Merlot to the Pinot Noir. We're not talking the old glass here. That's 7 nights. That's nearly 50 units a week. I hope she wasn't on a bike. Really. And then you lied. You landed your dad in it. Completely forgiven. No, Helen, no. Your parents, you should have just said, I ate some food when you were away. I'm your daughter. I was feeding your cat.
Yeah, well, you could a proper, decent negotiation, Matthew, and maybe she'd have got away with it.
Well, can I be alone in thinking that really doesn't the blame really lie here with the
cat.
with the husband? It's the husband. We all know there is this unspoken rule that when someone asks for your honest opinion about their cooking, that you have to say it's fabulous no matter what. You have to say it's great, the taste of a world beater. I know when I ask for honest opinions about my Sunday roast, if anyone has anything negative to say, they don't get to have any Sunday roast ever again. So I
Nice.
am so I am definitely going to forgive because it's all the dad's fault.
Well, they were this week's confessions, and I would be quite interested to know if it's provoked a thought deep down in your soul. Do you have a confession you'd like to share with us? Going to go for some summary confessions over the next few weeks. We all know you've got at least half a dozen. On the email, please, confessions@bbc.co.uk. And if you missed any of the shows this week, you can download all of the shows to your smartphone or tablet from the BBC iPlayer radio app. Monday, we had Gail Honeyman, and her book Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine. This is another Radio 2 Book Club choice. Professor Alice Roberts was in on Tuesday to discuss her new speaking tour and book, Tamed, 10 Species That Changed Our World. Wednesday, we had historian William Dalrymple, what a guy, and broadcaster Anita Anand, what a woman, here to talk about their new book, Koh-i-Noor, The History of the World's Most Infamous Diamond. And on Foodie Thursday, Nigel was cooking up a tea-smoked lamb with spicy Korean miso. So if you made it to the end of last week's podcast, you had to tweet, how many Vietnamese dong to the pound? It made sense last week. Thanks to Josky Joe and Neris and John, Ed Ross and Enrico Palazzo and the many more who did just that. This week's top secret code phrase is, say, do you have the internet in Britain? Yes, we invented it. Or was that the web? Or words to that effect. Thank you for listening. Play us a tune. This is the ID Daft Pop ramp, by the way. Thanks for downloading this podcast. We'll do it again next week.